Today I'm talking to Frankie Turk in London, England, member of the Youth Lead Repeat pushing for a peatland paradigm shift. Hi Frankie, thank you for joining us.
Hello, good
Hello.
to be here.
Thanks. Bog Day raises awareness of peatlands and the benefits they provide, the threats they face, and the ways we can all help protect. What is peat?
Peat is a part of a peatland. So peatland forms when you get a depression in the land, and then so you get an area like this, and then you get water basically collecting in this area. And then because of the water collecting in the area, the plants that fall into the water change the composition of the water. So the oxygen level goes down and the acidity changes. The plants that fall into the water, they don't decompose like they normally would, but they get pickled. So you imagine when you have food that is really like a pickle can last for ages in a jar of vinegar. It's the same thing with the plants that fall into the water of peatland. They form very, very slowly over thousands of years. If you imagine 1 meter, I don't know how tall you are, but a bit taller than you, that will have taken 1,000 years to form with these layers of semi-decomposed plants. That's kind of what peatland is.
Cool. Why is it so important?
Recently, they're getting very popular in terms of like media, and a lot of it is about the carbon that they store and their role in the climate crisis. They're actually the planet's largest terrestrial carbon store, which means that they actually store twice the carbon as all the forests. So everyone thinks of plant trees, the first thing to do when it comes to climate change, but actually restoring peatlands is a very, very efficient and useful way of capturing a lot of carbon. I mean, they're more like stores than taking out carbon, if that makes sense. So they have a different role in the system than trees, but they're very good for carbon. But this is just one reason why peatlands are really amazing and really super valuable for the whole world system. Some of the other things that are really cool about peatlands is that they have very unique plants and animals that live there. For example, they have lots of migratory birds, so the birds that kind of travel around the world and they land in these different wetlands around. And so these peatlands are really important for them. They also have really weird plants like the insect-eating sundew or other kind of carnivorous plants, because the soil is quite acidic sometimes. And what that means is that the plants can't get very good nutrients. So then they need to eat animals to get their nutrients. They have to eat a fly rather than getting nutrients from the soil as normally they would. Basically, they have really weird plants and animals. You don't find them in that many other places. So that's also really important. I could go on a long list, including flooding, lots of helping us with adapting to the effects of climate change. So, for example, flooding and fires, they're becoming more regular, and you see this happen. And peatlands have a big role in stopping that happening. Also, clean water. They have an amazing ability to filter the water and produce clean water. So when the opposite happens, when they're in a bad state, then you'll get this muddy runoff and the water won't be clean. So you have to process it again in a factory. So those are some reasons why peatlands are important.
Yeah. More than a third of the world's peatlands are in Canada, and they cover about 14% of Canada's territory. How do they help stop climate change?
The reason why they're very useful is because they store all this carbon in the form of these semi-decomposed plant matter. And when you drain them of the water, what happens is where they were being kind of pickled, they release carbon in the form of CO2, which is a greenhouse gas, which is what's making the planet warmer. That's just the normal cycle. So when a plant dies, normally it would decompose. So, the microbes would take it up and then it would go through the system, decompose. Like when you see tree leaves falling down and they're going brown, that's in one stage towards decomposing. And now you have a situation where the carbon that's coming out of the peatlands is 5 to 6% of the total emissions of human-made carbon emissions, which is, for comparison, twice the flying industry. So everyone talks about flying as something that's not very sustainable, not good for climate change, but actually peatlands are a way bigger issue and not many people are talking about it. So yeah, that's also why it's important people know that.
1 square meter of peatland in northern Canada has around 5 times the amount of carbon found in any 1 square meter of tropical rainforests in the Amazon. Even though they only take up 3% of global land, they store 25% of global soil carbon. How do they sequester carbon so well?
The key to that question is time. So they sequester carbon through the normal way that nature would take up carbon, which is through photosynthesis. When a plant forms, it will take in carbon like that. And then because the plant doesn't decompose, so time and water, those would be the 2 secret ingredients to make them such good carbon stores. And then just this building and building and building and building and layers of this plant matter. So imagine some peatlands are tens of thousands of years old. So really, really ancient.
Does it need to be underwater?
In order to keep the carbon, there needs to be water. Without the water, then the top layer of the land will become dry. And because there's oxygen in the air, it will basically mean that these plants will start decomposing. And same thing with like a pickle jar. So if you imagine pickles in a pickle jar, when they're in the vinegar, you can keep them in the fridge for like ages and nothing will happen. And it's the same thing with the water on the peatland. That as long as you have the water, the plants just stay there, they can stay there for thousands of years. Whereas if you took out all the vinegar from the pickle jar, the pickles are going to go bad pretty quickly. And that's the same thing with the peatland. So, yeah.
They also reduce flooding, correct?
So peatlands are really good for flood prevention for 2 reasons. Firstly, because they're kind of like a sponge. So often the mosses that form the peatland can take up a lot of water. So imagine you have like a heavy rainfall and then the peatland basically just expands like a sponge. And then the second reason, then sometimes there's maximum capacity. It's like a sponge. When it's full of water, it's not going to get any more water in it. But basically the top of the peatland got a lot of textures. It's kind of all like this because it's got all these plants. And so when you have this heavy rainfall and you have it covered in plants, it slows down the course of the water. So by the time it reaches the bottom, it's done all these wiggles and it slowed it down. Whereas when you don't have those 2 things, it means that 1, you're not going to get this sponginess. So it's just going to slide straight off. And 2, you're going to have a flat surface. So imagine pouring water on a flat surface comparison to something like this, it will go faster. So the flood will be more dramatic. So that's basically how they do that.
Yeah. When peatlands dry out and they are disturbed or burned, they become a major carbon source instead of a carbon sink. What can kids do to protect peatlands?
First of all, I think it's really cool if you get the chance to go see a peatland, to go experience it. So living in Canada, you're lucky that you can do that, because actually peatlands only take up 3% of the planet's surface area. So in comparison to all the other places, they're quite hard to find. So if you can go to a peatland, that would be good. And once you've gone to the peatland, tell other people about it, because the more you speak about it, the more people will know and the more people will appreciate this ecosystem, where probably beforehand they wouldn't. I think young people have a very, very nice way of communicating things in a simple way that people just understand it. So I think if you can do that, then you'll be doing a good job.
Yeah. What do you wish more people knew about peat?
I think people should think deeply about what deep time, old, ancient history really means, and what it means to lose that.
Yeah.
And I think that is only something that you can really do from an emotional point of view. I don't think you can do it just by calculating, okay, what does it mean to lose thousands of years of history from a dry point of view, but I think you have to really feel it. So I think if people feel that, and also it's not just the past, it's also the future. So thinking about this ancient history and also thinking about very future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if something happens in the past, it will affect the future in some way.
Exactly. The present becomes the past, but the present also becomes the future. And I think getting people to see this connection, and especially when it's an ecosystem that takes so long to form, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen really in mine or your lifetimes. And so it's important that we respect that and we understand the consequences of that.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining me today, Frankie. Click the link below to donate to repeat. And remember, together kids can save the world. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.